Well, welcome to part 2 of this video about tench fishing for novices. And in this video I'm going to look at baits, that's hook baits and ground bait mixes, and I'll look at how to proceed when you get on the bank. So the first thing I'm going to look at is hook baits. Everyone seems to have their own favourites, but red maggots came out on top by a mile. And they were followed by worms and casters, sweet corn and pellets, especially krill-based pellets. Got lots of mentions. Surprisingly, boilies weren't mentioned very much at all. The worm kebab seemed to have considerable success. Let's go and have a look at one of them. What is a worm kebab?
One of the most popular and seemingly very successful arrangements on the hook was what they call a worm kebab. I don't have any worms to hand, but I've got some plastic worms here. I don't know whether they'd work or not, plastic worms, to be honest. But you cut the worm into short pieces. I won't cut these, I'll just demonstrate. So you just take the little needle, stick it in at the end of your stop, and poke it through your worm. And you usually put 3 pieces on. And then put another piece on there. And it's chopped off about maybe slightly shorter than that. So the worms do in fact leak into the water. And they're usually combined with a feeder full of chopped worms and maggots. So you need a fair number of worms to do this, and you have to buy them. They are very expensive. The last price was something like 17 quid a kilo. But anyway, that's the worm kebab, and as I say, it seems to be very, very successful.
A little bit about dead maggots. I mean, several anglers mentioned using a few dead maggots in the mix, as it were. I mean, to kill them, you just simply stick them in a freezer. And the argument being that if you're being pestered by small fish, nipping your wiggly maggots or chewing bits off the end of your worms, then dead maggots was one way forward, in that the small fish tend to ignore them. They prefer the more active maggots. And the other thing is, they tend to stay where they are. They don't go scuttling off into their surrounding debris and hiding themselves. Plastic and rubber baits were popular, especially when you were troubled by small fish. I mean, and the other thing is, many anglers use them to keep bait on the hook. When you've got a great bunch of maggots on the hook, you stick a plastic maggot or caster on the end, and that tends to keep them in place. Or similarly worms, which tend to slip off hooks very easily. They use a plastic maggot to keep them on. And this is just a little selection of them, which I happen to have. I'm probably older than most of you watching this video.
These are Magellina grubs. I don't know what Magellina means. You get rubber casters. And again, these are casters. These are buoyant casters. This of course is sweet corn. But this is pop-up sweet corn. So if you're fishing venues with sort of silt on the bottom, you might want to use a pop-up rig. So you've got these things which sort of rise up in the water, and ditto with a sweet corn. So they sort of sit up above the silt. So if you're fishing sort of natural maggots or natural casters or worms, you can make them pop up by cutting off a little piece of rig foam and sticking it on your hair or sticking it on your hook, so that they sort of rise up in the water and are more easily seen.
On some venues they're banned, especially the more popular venues. So to get round this, one enterprising bloke, he resorted to using pieces of pork rind, which he carved into sort of maggot shapes and sweet corn shapes and dyed them appropriately. And he claimed to have considerable success with this. I'd never heard of it before. I wonder if it works with barbel. Bizarre. Well, next we come to Groundbait mix. You only have to visit a tackle shop to see the bewildering array on offer. Shelf after shelf after shelf, piled high.
So here's a few of the things you might wish to put into your groundbait, to stuff into your feeder or throw out into the lake or pond in big balls. There are dozens of these. Of course, in addition to that, there's also maggots and casters and worms. I suppose by trial and error you just have to find out what works. Well, there's a great mass of information about this on the internet, on these videos on YouTube. Mesmerising it is for a beginner.
But the most recommended, or the most commonly used flavours tended to be fish-based. Although I did come across a couple of anglers who mentioned using molasses, which is very sweet, sugary stuff. Green or dark coloured groundbaits were certainly a plus. Many anglers recommended those. What else do you put in the mix? Well, it seems whatever comes to hand. Fishy groundbait, sweet corn, small pellets, usually between 2 and 4 millimetre diameter pellets, chopped worms, hemp, maggots, casters. They all feature in most mixes. Opinions varied greatly about hemp. Most people favour it, but a sizable number think that tench become fixated on it, hoovering up little grains of hemp and ignoring the angler's sort of super duper mix, not to mention his luscious hook bait. However, adding liquor from a boiling of hemp to your groundbait mix was was definitely approved. Tench, like most fish, find the taste and smell of hemp very, very attractive. The most consistent advice, was you can mix it any time, you know, the night before or on the bank, but you should not add your maggots or casters until just before you start fishing. That was the consensus of all of these experts. As for the proportions of each of these ingredients, or indeed the flavours which you can add to them, which varied from sort of fish to pineapple, I couldn't possibly comment. Other than to say, it doesn't want to be too sloppy and it doesn't want to be too stiff, whatever sloppy and stiff means in the context of bait. So we've got the gear, we've tied the rings, we've got the hook bait, we've mixed up our ground bait, and now we're off fishing down onto the bank. What time do you go? Well, whilst tench can be caught, you know, during most of the daylight hours, first light was definitely the preferred time, with last light coming a close second. There was nobody that recommended fishing for tench at night. Most of the people regarded it as a complete waste of time. So how do you choose where you're going to fish on this bank, around this pond or around this lake? What do you look for? I mean, tench like to be close to their safe refuge. They don't venture very far on most lakes or ponds. And they favour patches of lilies with their sort of dense forest of tough underwater stems firmly anchored into the bed of the lake or pond. They also like thick bankside vegetation like rushes and sedges and reeds. So any unnatural sort of movement of lily pads or sedges, rushes and reeds would indicate a fish on the move, feeding fish. And as tench root around on the bottom feeders, they disturb small bubbles of gas which rise up to the surface. So keep your eye out for them as well. That would also indicate certainly not only just fish, but it tends to indicate tench. So you decided on a swim, where you're going to fish, and we'll look at depths and features. It's essential to know the depth of the water you're fishing. Now there are several ways of doing this, involving weights, plumb bobs, but there are lots of excellent videos on showing how to plumb a swim, and difficult to explain on here without a pond outside. Slowly dragging a weight back towards you will indicate underwater features like, you know, gravel bars or drop-offs, which obviously would be of interest. In tench you found at most depths were sort of 2 feet in the margins to 20 feet or more out in the middle. But the general consensus was they tend to be found mostly in water between 6 and 10 feet deep. I mean, these yellow lilies, they will grow in water up to 10 feet deep. However, if you're feeling flush, there are these things called castable fish finders. Tie the end of your line and you simply cast them out. and they measure the depth, they show the contours, they show underwater vegetation, and perhaps most importantly, they also show fish. So we're on the swim, we've got the depths, we know a little bit about the features. What about baiting up the swim? Well, as a barbel angler who's sort of stick a pellet on a hair, on the hook, make it last an hour or more, and just throw a few freebie small pellets in, again about once an hour. This loose feeding of swims was completely off the scale. Just to quote 4 of the many examples. You can write a book about this. He's the first bloke, first angler. I tend to spot out 12 pints of feed every 24 hours. This might be 3 pints of red maggots, 2 pints of casters, 3 pints of hemp, 3 pints of small pellets, and 2 tins of corn. The second one was out with a big mixing bowl. 4 pints of hemp were mixed with 4 pints of red maggots, 3 pints of casters, and a kilo of 3mm halibut pellets. Number 3. If I'm introducing groundbait, I catapult 30 or 40 balls at the start of the session. And yeah, these balls were very small. And just to round this off, number 4, I spotted in 4 pints of fresh casters together with around 3 pints of hemp and pellets. Staggering. Now, opinions of how much and how often varied vastly, depending on the time of year, the size of the venue, and given what I've just read out, the depth of your pocket. We're all baited up now, how much you want to put in. So we come to casting accuracy, clips, spods and spoms, a complete new vocabulary. Accuracy when casting and baiting a swim was mentioned as important by almost everybody. Especially on large lakes. Now, as this involves using a reel clip, spods and spoms, there are many videos on the internet which give excellent demonstrations of how this is done without me having to do it here. In fact, I don't have a spod or a spom. If you're not familiar with line clips, on your spool, on your reel, is this thing here, a little spring-loaded button, and you clip your line through there. To the uninitiated, like myself, spods and spoms are like giant feeders which are stuffed with particle mix, which they release when they hit the water after you've cast them out. And you need a very strong rod to cast spoms and spods. 4 or 5 pound test curve is mentioned, but you can buy special rods, spod rods, for spodding. And being completely ignorant of such matters, I've discovered that spods have a buoyant nose, so when they land in the water they tip upside down and the contents fall out into the swim. Where spoms, they have a button on the nose. When it hits the water, it releases a sort of quick release mechanism, and the spom comes open and again releases its contents into water. That's the difference between them. Who would have thought it? So you've been sitting on a bank for ages, twiddling your thumbs, peering at rod ends and waiting for that bite indicator to beep 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 beep. Really annoying. What about recasting? Well, like most fishing, tench fishing requires a tremendous amount of patience, and most anglers didn't recommend recasting within the first hour. So usually you recast every hour or so, and when it comes to topping up the swim, well, you just, as some people seem to do, just pile it in, or do you top up the swim little and often? Well, I think most anglers preferred the second method, especially when you've got on popular fisheries, where when one angler moves off a peg, somebody immediately moves in, like musical chairs. In those circumstances, it's very easy to overfeed a swim and just kill it. Well, having reached the four-gig limit on part 2, part 3 of the ventures into tench fishing will consist mainly of bits I wasn't able to fit in to parts 1 and 2. So I'll be looking at how you load this maggot feeder, and also include how to tie this figure of 8 knot, which they all go on about, and how to fit these line stops or float stops, how to get them onto the line, and whatever else I feel I'll stick on part 3.